Hi everyone, it's Lehman with Lace Covered Skies. I'm here today to do a tutorial on these specimen cards. I'm not sure how best to show them. I made a whole bunch of these in my last set of journals, and I wanted to do a quick tutorial on them. And I used cardstock, so I printed onto cardstock, and the papers that I used are from Bluegrass Digitals. They're beautiful papers, perfect for this project. I mentioned them in my last tutorial, which was the clear envelopes tutorial, and I'm going to link them below also. But I loved working with these papers, and I'm going to show you how I make these slide mounts, and I'm going to use these papers. So I'm looking for my notes. All right. So there are kind of a lot of steps in here. So this video might be in two parts because when I go past 20 minutes, it just takes me so long to upload. But if it goes past 20 minutes, I'll do a part 2 to finish the project. But the first thing you're going to do, because like I said, there are a lot of steps. The first thing to do would be to find a pattern paper that you like. I'm going to be using this pattern paper, and I printed it onto cardstock. You will then need 2 solid pieces. Solid meaning just a solid color. And that's going to be what the back looks like. Next, you're going to, so after you pick your papers, you're going to cut a length of that paper in the width that will fit the hole that you want to go in the middle. So where did I put the, okay, they're right here. So like for this, sorry, I'm reaching over and grabbing it really quick. So you're gonna have to cut the paper so that there's enough room to die cut. You could die cut, you could use a circle cutter, you can use an X-Acto knife. So all those options, but you want to cut all of your paper so that it will fit the circle size that you want inside. So for me, I am using a die cutting machine, and I'm using these dies. And like I said, you can use a big hole punch, like a big round hole puncher. You could use a circle cutter. You could use an X-Acto knife. Yeah. So I'm using a die cutting machine, and the 2 sizes that I've been using are these 2 sizes, and I'll go ahead and measure them for you so that you kind of have an idea of how big mine are. This is, it's like a little bit bigger than 2 inches, so I don't know if I'm not exactly in the middle, but it's about a 2-inch diameter. And this one is like 1.5 or a little over than 1.5 in diameter, sorry. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the bigger one. So the one that's almost 2 inches, yeah. So if I'm going to use this one, I'm stacking my pattern paper, and this part, the order that I'm going to give you, it's just going to prevent you from having a headache later because there's so many parts and layers and they need to line up correctly. So I'm giving it to you in the order that's going to make your life the easiest. I hope that made sense. But you're going to need the pattern paper, and then you're going to need 2 solid pieces of cardstock. The middle paper can be just a regular piece of paper. It doesn't necessarily need to be cardstock. Then you're going to make sure that they're all the same size. Now the reason I say that is because if you're using a digital, it usually has like some edge around it. So when you cut off that edge, you're going to also want to trim your cardstock. Now there might be an easier way. I found this to be the easiest way because when I didn't do this, I ended up trimming way too much. But I just made them all the same size and I stacked them up. And I'm going to be cutting my paper so that there's a little bit more room than the size of the circle that's going to go in the middle, or that's going to go in the card. So for instance, I want to do this side. So I am going to give myself probably do like a 3 inches. I'm going to do 3 inches so that there's a little bit of room on this side and on this side. So let me go ahead and get my paper cutter. Now my paper cutter, you're going to have to bear with me because it's kind of hard for me to see the numbers since it's just solid black and the numbers don't really come through. Okay, wait. It's really hard for me to see, so I'm just going to go ahead and put a little mark where this should be cut. So it's about 3 inches. Of course, you can go a little bit larger if you want. And I do have some that are a little bit larger. So you see that I'm stacking all 3 sheets, and I am going to cut all 3 sheets the same size. And then because this is this size, I'm probably only going to have room for 2. And I kind of don't like it to be too square. So I'm going to make one more square than the other so that I have at least one that's not so square. So I think I'm going to cut it right under the sunflowers. Yeah, I'm going to cut it right under the sunflowers. Make sure there's enough for it. Actually, I'll just cut a little above. Or I'll do it right there. So now you have 2 sets. After you do that, you are going to die cut a hole into the 3 pieces. So let's go ahead and work with this one, and I'm going to put this one aside. So I am going to bring my die cutting machine over here. I have the Sizzix Big Shot. I love it. This is probably my most used tool. Okay. Now, there are 3 layers, and this does work with 3 layers. So again, I'm stacking the colorful or the pattern piece and the 2 solid pieces. I'm going to take my die. I'm going to put it, because this image is like this, I'm just going to make it in the middle. Sometimes I'll make it a little bit asymmetrical, but this one I think will look good just in the middle. And then I'm going to sandwich it. And roll it through. And I think 3 pieces of cardstock is the most that my die cutting machine will cut. I'm just rolling it back the other way because it's hitting the wall. I don't have enough room. So I cut it, and let me move this out of the way. And then I will go ahead and take out the circles in the middle. And like I said, 3 pieces is probably the maximum that it will do, because the last piece I have to kind of work it to get it to come out. All right, so there we have it. Those are the 3 layers in the specimen card. Let me zoom back in. Now the next thing we're going to do is cut smaller pieces. We're going to cut 2 pieces of transparency so that it's enough to go over the edge. But you don't want to cover too much, because what I do is I glue everything together at the very end. So I want to leave room where there's paper. Sorry I'm talking so slow. I'm trying to make it make sense. But so I've gone ahead and cut 2 pieces of transparency already. So they're just squares right here. There's 2 pieces, and it might be hard to see, but they go like a little bit beyond the circle. That way you have room to sew around it, but then you also have room left over to glue. And I'll explain all of that. So there we have that, and we have the 2 pieces of transparency. Now I'm going to pick my flower. I have some newly pressed flowers that I really should bring up here, because I've been using these ones over and over again. All right, I think I'm going to choose this one. This is my favorite flower. And I will trim it. I'm gonna trim it so that all of it stays in the frame. So there we go. Now what I do is I use this glue, and I just put a little dot of it. And sometimes I use tweezers to pick up the flower. And another thing I do is wherever I'm working, I just kind of brush everything off, and then I brush off the surface that the flower is going to go onto. And you might as well brush the other side as well. Okay. So I'm going to glue, I'm just going to put little dots. Just little dots of glue. You want to put it on the side that's the back side. This flower is it doesn't really have a back side, so anywhere will really do. Now I haven't tried another glue just because I've been comfortable with this one, but you can see it clear. It dries clear, but you can see it in the slide mount or in the transparency sheets. Okay, so you don't need too much glue. I'm just going to put this over just to make sure that it's in the center. And then once you do that, you're going to take the other transparency sheet, brush it off, and then lay it over top. Okay, then, and it's really only going to stick to the bottom part, but it's okay. It'll stick a little bit to the top sheet as well, but you're not really depending on the glue to hold this together, because you'll see in the next step why. But then I'll leave this aside and let it dry for a very long time. So I will just couple these two together because they go together, and then put them aside. Now, this is where it's kind of like a baking or a cooking show because I have some prepared to that step. So after it has glue, you have glued the flower to the slide mount, which is the step that this set is at. So as you can see, I have the pattern paper and I have 2 solid papers. And then I have the slide mount, or this isn't a slide mount, sorry. I have the 2 pieces of transparency and I had glued them, and it stuck together, the top and the bottom, and it's a little bit misaligned, but that's okay. But I did notice that when I made this, I didn't cut one of the pieces down. So I will go ahead and trim that because you want the side mount to cover this hole, but you don't want it to be too big. So I am going to trim some of it off. And I'm going to trim some of this side off as well. So that's where we're at. We've glued the flower, put little dots of glue to glue the flower in between the 2 transparencies. And then we're going to be, see, this is misaligned. So let me put it over again. The next step is going to be finding, you're going to pick one of these solid colors to be the middle piece. So for this is going to be the middle piece. And what I would do is go over to my sewing machine and sew a line, just a square around the whole thing, to hold the transparency sheets down onto this cardstock. So now this is like a cooking show again, where I've prepared that already. So that's what I did to this. So I had the pattern paper, the 2 solid pieces, and then I glued the flower onto the transparency, and I went to my sewing machine and I sewed around. Just make sure that you're getting, like, you're not going into the circle. That's it. Then the next thing to do would be to line up these holes or the circles, and that's why in the beginning it was so important to cut everything, cut all 3 sheets at the same time and die cut them at the same time, because when you don't do that, it makes everything misaligned and it's frustrating. So it's gonna come to this point, and the next thing we're gonna do is just glue these pieces together so that there's no sewing lines on the specimen card itself. Now, of course, you can leave a sewing line if you want to. You could totally do that, and I think it could look really cool. I haven't tried it yet, but I think that could be a very cool choice as well. So I'm using art glitter glue because it's transparency, it's plastic, so I want to make sure that the glue does a good job of holding it together. So there's the glue. Now remember that this is the middle sheet. So on top needs to go the pattern paper. And then you're going to flip it over. You can also leave it like this. I've left some like this where you can see the sewing around. You could totally do that. I did that for all the ones in my last journal. But because I was going to film a tutorial here today, I wanted to make it look more finished. But I think both ways are good. I think this way, when you leave the sewing part exposed, it gives it a little bit of character. And again, you're going to want to make sure that it's the right way so everything lines up. All right. And then you just set it aside to dry. Now, I've mentioned this before. I have this thing called a glue press. It's just a book. It's just this book that I use whenever I'm gluing anything kind of small. I put this in here just so the glue doesn't go everywhere, and I kind of smooth it out. And then I stick it into my glue press. I let it dry for a few hours. Then I'm going to take it out and corner punch the edges. Now, it's better, I think, if you corner punch everything together, although my corner punch has trouble going through that many layers. But I just kind of figured that out later. All right, so I hope that was clear. And if you have any questions at all, please leave me a comment down below with your question. These are so much fun to make. I'm going to do a mask making session, I think. It's going to be Mask Making Monday. And I'm going to show you how I make a whole bunch of them at once. And it really doesn't take as long as you would think. But if you have any questions, please let me know down below. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos from me, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye, everyone.